Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie. On behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event this evening with Samantha Hart and Melissa Maerz discussing Blind Pony. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is this Tuesday, March 23rd at 6 p.m. with Cleo Wade and conversation with Nicole Ritchie and Cameron Diaz discussing What the Road Said. For regular updates on our upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter, which you can do on our website. To submit a question during this event, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We will try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. Also, support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads Blind Pony directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro.fm and Kobo for those who are interested. Tonight's copies of Blind Pony will be signed by Samantha Hart, so make sure you get them while supplies last. A little more about Samantha Hart. Samantha's career has spanned music, film, advertising, film, and advertising, earning her a reputation as an award-winning creative director. Her creative marketing campaigns brought prominence and Academy Awards to films such as Fargo, Dead Man Walking, and Boys Don't Cry, while earning cult status for independent features Dazed and Confused, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Blind Pony is her first book. A little more about Melissa Maerz. Melissa worked as an editor at Spin and Rolling Stone, a staff writer for Entertainment Weekly and the Los Angeles Times, and a supervising producer on HBO Vice's News Tonight. She was a founding editor at New York Magazine's Vulture website. She is the author of All Right, All Right, All Right, the oral tradition of Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused. And without further ado, I'm going to turn over the screen to Samantha and Melissa. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here to talk about this book that I loved with me. I want to tell you, Samantha, you sent this to me. I did not know what to expect. And from the second I started reading it, I felt like I had to hide from my children so that I could just keep turning the pages. I was really wrapped. I mean, it's a total page turner. To me, it is a story of hustle, of just doing whatever you have to do to survive. And I hope it's made into a movie one day. It is just excellent. So congratulations on writing such an excellent book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's good to see you again and talk to you again.
Yeah.
Because we met on this book. All right, all right, all right. The oral history of Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused. My old pal, Richard.
So that's my book. Yes. And let's talk a little bit about how we met. So I reached out to you originally to talk about this book that I wrote, The Oral History of Dazed and Confused. And I knew a little bit about you. I knew that you had been involved in the cover art for Nirvana's Nevermind. And I knew that you had made the iconic poster for Dazed and Confused with the smiley face. I think a lot of people can remember this smiley face poster. But when I started talking to you, I really started learning more about you and your life and your background. And something that really stuck with me is that you told me you were excited to work on the poster for Dazed and Confused because it was a movie about high school, and you felt like it was your experience, your chance to work on a high school experience movie that had nothing to do with your life as a teenager. Tell us a little bit about why.
Well, Dazed and Confused was really happening at the time that I should have been experiencing all those senior benchmarks. And I actually graduated a few years earlier than I should have, because I skipped classes and took correspondence courses and had to get out earlier because I was supporting myself. And so I was kind of living as an adult during that time that I should have been having that senior experience. When I say in the book, when all the seniors were throwing their caps up in the air, I was holding mine close to my vest because I was so proud I actually got through it. And you know, working, I was going to school half a day and working the other half a day and hitchhiking because I was too young to drive. And, you know, so it was a very cathartic thing. And I remember the first screening, I took my pal, Julie Hall, incredible creative, with me because like I needed support to really like, you know, get my mind wrapped around this whole movie about high school, you know, and my boss even said like, oh, you'll know exactly what to do with this because you lived it. And I really didn't. It was really kind of, I lived it kind of vicariously through the movie. So.
You were a teenage runaway, so you missed a lot of the experience that most teenagers
had. I
yeah.
did. I mean, I had a lot of crazy things, you know, that pubescent girls do, you know, experiences, you know, with drugs and things like that. But not that like sort of bonding experience where you're part of a crowd, a group of people that hang out and party together and do things like that. I mean, I had a little bit of that, but, you know, I missed out on a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of, you know, it was kind of a cathartic thing working on Dazed and Confused a little bit for me, and kind of, you know, being part of that group, that class, you know, that group of people. So I think Dazed and Confused is special to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And I think that you really talk about that so well in your book. You know, how, you know, it affects a lot of people in very unique ways, brings up a lot of things for different people in different ways.
Yeah. Well, you had as I said, you had a very different kind of teenage experience than a lot of people had. The beginning of your book talks about how difficult your childhood was growing up in rural Pennsylvania. And it kind of seemed like from the very beginning, the odds were kind of stacked against you, or at least to me. I kind of would like to start with talking about your birth and your name. So your mother named you after the woman that your father was having an affair with. What kind of effect did that have on you from the very beginning to have something as personal as your name be associated with a family trauma like that?
Well, I think it really shaped so many things in my life in so many ways. I mean, you know, your name is your identity. It's your whole self. And so to be named after an affair and to have that brought up over and over again from a very young age, I found it very traumatizing because I was named after someone I never would meet. I never knew, someone that obviously wasn't liked. And so you know, my name was Pamela Sue Butter, and, you know, Pammy Sue was my name. And every time I heard it, it was a cringe reaction. And my father had named me Sam. He didn't want to name me Pammy Sue. And before I was born, he said, if it's a boy, it's going to be Sam. If it's a girl, it's going to be Sam. And to the day he died, my father never called me anything but Sam. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of, and I kind of gravitated to that name and finally claimed it for myself because I just really wanted to cast off that name that was given to me that was an identity that I didn't relate to.
Yeah. So you start this book off by talking about your childhood and this farm. You return in the beginning of this book to this farm that you grew up on, and you talk about this blind pony that you had on this farm that your grandfather gave to you. Why did you want to name the book after the blind pony that you had as a kid?
Well, it's kind of a metaphor on several levels. You know, the blind pony, she was a show pony and her eye was kicked out, and she was only blind really in one eye, but it was so gruesome to look at. Most people couldn't even look at it. And when he presented me with this pony, you know, it was like, you know, when all of your sisters are getting these beautiful horses and you know, and I'm getting this blind pony. You know, when we would go on horse rides, I mean, everyone could gallop faster and go faster and get, you know, my horse, I had to really, you know, cuddle her because she would shy at things. You know, horses spook when they're scared. And I think that in some ways it developed sort of an instinctual thing in me to be able to, be my own, find my own guide, be my own guide, find my way through life the way I had to sort of lead that pony. Like if a bee came along, she'd spook. If the tree branch had cracked, she'd spook. So I had to sort of anticipate those things as a little girl, riding her bareback, with my legs, with my, heart. And so I just felt like, and then the other piece to it is, it's kind of a metaphor for not being seen and heard. And I think that a lot of people that have gone through some of the traumatic things that I went through as a young girl feel that they aren't seen and heard. And I think that that's part of the reason I wanted to write this book, was to shine a light on it and to really let people see the real me, to cast aside any fear of or self-doubt about my own ego of who I am, and just be this vulnerable blind pony. Yeah. And through writing the book, I found there are a lot of blind ponies out there, apparently. A lot of people have reached out to me, and it's been really an interesting response to the book.
Well, one of the things that you write about in pretty horrific detail is the sexual abuse that you suffered at the hands of your grandfather. And this goes on for a very long period of time. And your mother is there living with you while you are in the house with your grandfather. And there are degrees of her understanding what's going on until a certain point where she catches him and it's just clear to her what's happening. Why do you think she never did anything to stop it in all of those years?
I think because she didn't know what to do. I mean, I think that she was very much in denial that it was happening. I think that she knew it was happening. I know that she knew it was happening. But I think that she, in order to cope with her situation, I mean, I can't really speak for her. I don't want to say things that maybe would be interpreted incorrectly, but I think she to recognize that this was happening would expose her own vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And I think that she had to stay strong. She had 5 daughters. She was a single mom. She had been in an abusive marriage, or not a good marriage. And, you can conjecture. I've been to a lot of therapy, and, I've heard from a very dear uncle of mine, my mother was abused. But I don't want to say that, it's not my place to say. But I think that it was just much too hard for her to admit. She was in denial. So.
Well, you were kind of saved by your father, who called you up when you were 14 years old and asked you to come out to Arizona, where he was living at the time. And your father is such a great character in this book. I'm wondering if, for people who haven't read the book yet, if you would read the scene where you first meet him. Now, remember, she's 14 years old in this scene, meeting her father for the first time.
Yeah, and I would reckon to say that. He didn't actually, I wouldn't use the word saved.
Okay.
But, it was interrupted by him.
Yes.
Okay. So it took a moment to adjust my vision to the dimly lit bar. At 7 p.m., the sun had still not set. So Dave's tavern was as dark as the old cellar and as cold as the freezer chest full of stale pastries. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a pool table in the center, surrounded by a few torn-up booths and a bar. A small light illuminated the way to the restrooms, and a payphone hung on the wall near the door. The old jukebox was playing one of Wild Bill's favorites, Nat King Cole's Smile, so I knew I was in the right place. I paused a moment to listen to the words, blinking back tears. Intuitively, I knew Wild Bill wouldn't want to see Sam crying. So I headed to the phone affixed to the wall, pretending to be chatting up an old friend. My fingers traced graffiti on the walls phone numbers, and hearts with initials engraved inside. Gathering my emotions, I waited for the song to end. With my composure in check, I made my entrance and began walking toward the man hunched over at the bar, who sensed I was staring at him as he swiveled on the bar stool just enough for me to glimpse his profile. The next record dropped down on the jukebox and a Waylon Jennings song played as a layer of cigarette smoke over the bar lifted. It was him, Wild Bill, my father. He barked out, "Give me another VO water tall," and "Hey, Mikey." He turned toward me with a twinkle in his eye and a broad smile and nonchalantly announced, "This here's my girl, Sam." We could stop there or
So
continue.
Yeah, your dad is such a great character in this book. And one of the things that you really know him for by the end of it is his ability to kind of tell these tall tales. Saying that Johnny Cash named a boy named Sue was inspired by him naming you Sam. A girl named Sam made a boy named Sue.
Yes.
And he just tells these great tall tales throughout the book. How do you think his ability to bluff so well affected you? And did you inherit that same gift?
I've thought about that a lot because, children learn more from what you are than what you teach. There's that quote, whatever. I think that really applies here. I didn't think he was bluffing. Why would I think he was bluffing? What's he bluffing about? I thought he knew Johnny Cash. I thought I inspired the song, A Boy Named Sue. So I really took it at face value for a while. But you start to see through that veneer. And then also something else starts happening. You start growing up, right? I didn't stay that age forever. I went to high school, graduated high school, began to mature and be on my own. I sort of started to see, well, that's bullshit. That's not right or whatever. And so I think that I took the good parts of my dad and realized that they were in me. I wouldn't really say it was bluffing. It was like, I needed a job. There was a job at Joe's Pizzeria and you had to be of age to serve alcohol. So I used someone's ID to get the job, and I used her name. And so, it created quite a quandary for me because, the owner Joe would be yelling out the name Angie, and so I'm Pam, I'm Sam, and I'm Angie now. So now I'm three different people, and and not to mention that Angie had brown hair and brown eyes. So it's just kind of like, and I don't know how I got that job. So yeah, I bluffed my way into the job and I guess you could say that, but it was about survival. It wasn't really about, I think for my dad, the tall tales were sport. It was fun for him. He enjoyed it. It was where he lived in, when I grew up, I had imaginary friends, the same kind of thing. My dad lived in an imaginary world of his own creation, for his own reasons, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely clear in the book that it's part of survival for you. I'm amazed at how well you were able to just adapt to the moment and give people what they wanted to hear. Somebody says you must be British and you're able to have a British accent suddenly. Someone says that you're Australian and you suddenly have an Australian accent. Your name changes every few chapters depending on, who you're giving this person. You're just an excellent, almost an actress, I think, who's able to adapt to every opportunity that you got at a time when you really needed every opportunity that you got. So I didn't mean to imply that you were honest, just that this was part of you being able to survive at a time when everything was against you.
That's right. Some of the things I did, to survive, if I had it to do over again, or if I, thought about it, you have to remember, I was someone who was abused from the time I was 5 years old. Yeah. So I equated, abuse with being loved. So, in that regard, it's like, if I had someone offered me a place to stay, and then suddenly I learn it's friends with benefits. If it wasn't a matter of the heart, maybe that was okay. I just would go with it because I had no option, or I felt I had no options. So I think it's kind of, looking back on it, I see some choices I made, but, like, for example, one of the most scary things, and like when you say my father saved me, it makes me laugh, because after Joe got tired of calling out for Angie and I wouldn't respond, he fired me. And the only job I could get was at Hobo Joe's, which is kind of like a Denny's, like a dive coffee shop. And it was out on Black Canyon. I think it's called the Highway in Arizona, but like a freeway. And I hitchhiked that every day after school, stuck my thumb out, got to Hobo Joe's on time for work, and then hitchhiked home. Would walk up to the freeway entrance and hitchhike home. Not the safest area, without even thinking about it at night. And then my dad found out that I was working there. And so suddenly he and his cronies were stopping off when they were, pissed drunk, to have coffee at Hobo Joe's and taunt me as I'm trying to do my job. And I saw more of my dad in the 2 weeks I worked at Hobo Joe's than I saw in the entire time I lived in Arizona, to be honest, because he would come and, because it was funny to him that Sam was working at Hobo Joe's, because it was on his way home. And if you can believe it, he'd say, "Okay, see you, Sam." And, knowing full well that I was going to be sticking my thumb out in a few minutes and hitchhike home.
Yeah.
So, he was just an interesting, he was a colorful character. He was charismatic. You couldn't be mad at him for long. I mean, it's funny, like when I worked at JCPenney, I got fired from there because he showed up drunk one day and ran out of the store, stole 2 poinsettias on the way out, and thought it was hilarious. And we went to Dave's Tavern, and he put the poinsettias up on the bar, and I got fired. He was just a character. He just had no sense of what fatherhood meant. He was, but I think that, well, go ahead.
Well, I had a follow-up question that about all these jobs that you had throughout this. If you don't mind, I'd just love to read a short list so people get a sense of all the things that you did.
Okay, go ahead, embarrass me.
You were a waterbed salesperson. You were a backgammon hustler. You were a nude model. You were a photo stylist. You were a drug courier. You were a receptionist for Neil Diamond's publishing company. And people have to remember, a lot of this happened before you were even 20 years old. So what do you think was the single biggest factor in your personality that allowed you to just be able to keep getting jobs one after the other after the other? Because there are a lot of times where I worried in this book, you've been kicked out of somebody's place and you had no place to live and no money. And it's just kind of like, I think a lot of the suspense in this book is, how are you going to be able to make the money to have another place to live?
Well, my father was a gambler and he was an alcoholic. And so there's that addiction gene, but for me, I was able to kind of turn that addiction gene into becoming addicted to winning, like a gambler would. Like, I am not going to fold. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to show everybody that I'm a winner. I can do this. I'm not going to, I'm going to play every card I've got, and I'm going to win, and I'm going to keep going. And it was so important to me, for example, to finish high school. Do you know, when I graduated, it was the single most important day of my life. And, I invited my mother. She didn't show up. But, one of the things I did was I took all the money I had and bought a ticket back to Pennsylvania because I just had a need to see my mom. You know, I really wanted to just say, look, here's my diploma. I did it. I graduated. And I snuck up around. I hitchhiked over to the farm and I hid in the trees up above the farm. And all of a sudden the dogs started barking like they do for an intruder. And then my grandfather came out on the porch and started ringing this bell. And it was just like, you know, and I just hightailed out of there. I never even got to see my mother. But, you know, I think that it was this desire in me to like prove everybody wrong. I wasn't this Pammy Sue mistress person. I wasn't this, you know, person that was abused. I could rise above that. And I just wanted to do whatever it took to, you know, whatever, by any means necessary, I was not going to fail.
So a follow-up to that, being addicted to winning, one of my favorite parts of this book is that you became this queen of backgammon, that, you know, you're this teenage girl who is taking these rich older guys for all they've got. And you do mention in the book that you learned about backgammon because you were staying with a guy who taught you, and you kind of stole this book that had the rules about it. But I can't believe that that's all it took. So were you just reading this every single day and practicing every day? How does a person become a backgammon hustler?
Well, you know, for example, when I first got introduced to this person, he wanted to, you know, I was so naive and stupid, but he wanted to meet me first before committing that I could stay with him.
Yeah.
And so I, you know, came out to LA. I just wanted to get away from Wild Bill at that point.
Yeah.
You know, I just was done with Wild Bill. I was done with all his Wild Billisms. I just wanted to get away from him. So I wanted to come to California because I actually had been here when I was young and I really loved the weather. I didn't, you know, I had no designs on being an actress or an actor or getting in the business in any way. But someone had told me about someone who was looking for a roommate. And so I came over here and met with this person, and out of the gate, I walk in the door of this mid-century cliffhanger and up in Beechwood Canyon, and out of the gate, he's like putting lines of coke down, you know, and just like, I'm just watching him and I'm just doing what he's doing. So all of a sudden I'm like snorting cocaine, and you know, and he's like, let's play some backgammon. And backgammon was enjoying a huge craze, especially in Los Angeles, I think. I never heard of backgammon. But I just kind of, he put the board out, and, you know, and I kind of knew some kind of gambling kind of things, like blowing on the dice or whatever, like my dad used to do. And I just started playing, and it's not that hard of a game until you get really deep into it. You know, you can sort of follow along and sort of get it, what somebody's doing, and you roll, they move, you can kind of get it. But again, I guess that's called bluffing. But then, you know, I leave and I'm going to come back in 2 weeks. And I find this book that he has and I snatch it. It's, you know, sandwiched between a Playboy and an Esquire, and I snatch it and I take it back to Phoenix with me and I study it cover to cover. I mean, just like it's like, you know, the Holy Grail. And I really learned about it because, you know, you couldn't go online and learn these things back then. You know, it's like you really had to read about it. And so I came back, and we would play, like, starting on Friday night. We would stay up all weekend and play until like Sunday morning. Like, I mean, it would just be a nonstop tournament. And there was a club in town called Pips, and he really, you know, he talked about it all the time, like it was so great or whatever. And he was kind of going through a midlife crisis, that guy. But at any rate, I went to a job interview and I didn't get the job, so I was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I saw the Polo Lounge, and I knew about the Polo Lounge, and I was curious. I went in and I met a really nice film producer, who said, hey, would you like to go with me? I'm going over to this backgammon club. Do you want to come along? And I said, sure. And he goes, do you know how to play? And then the bluff. Again. I said, well, I know a little bit, and that was my first entree in, and then a series of other events happened, and he gave me some passes, and I started going, and then I just became this beloved little fixture there, and I was called Backgammon Girl, and I just was like a little lucky charm to certain people, and I think the wild Bill in me really came out then, because I would start weaving a yarn and tell tales and stories and entertain people that way, and I always won. So
that's great.
That was that story. I'm actually quite good at a lot of gambling, blackjack, ponies.
Doesn't surprise me.
I don't do it.
I want to go back to this man that you were living with at the time, who you took this Backgammon book from. He is one of many people in this book who I would say abused you. I don't know if you would call it abuse, by offering you a place to stay in exchange for sex. And sometimes in the book you talk about yourself as someone who consents to these arrangements, but it's always very clear that you don't have a lot of other options. So I'm curious if the Me Too movement has made you look back on those years of your life differently.
Well, in some ways, yes. For example, if it weren't for the Me Too movement and all the courageous women who came forward to talk about their experiences, I would have never written this book, because talking about sexual abuse, even though my abuse was so different, I was, abused from the time I was a child. So that's not Me Too. That's something else.
Right.
But, the Me Too movement broke down a lot of barriers for women to come forward and be able to talk about things. And, and I would even say, like Bruce, the character that taught me the backgammon, I consented to sex with him because I felt so desensitized by that time about my sexuality. If it was a matter of the heart, that was different for me, and so if it wasn't a question of exposing that part of me, maybe sex was okay. I didn't enjoy it. It was cringeworthy. I give you that. But, this guy I describe it in the book as like Coke bottle lenses that he made him look like a Margaret Keane painting. His eyes with the big eyes, and when he would take them off, again, he was like, I would wonder, is he completely blind? So I'm having sex now with a blind man. It was very emotional. It was very hard for me, because I thought about my pony. I thought about my childhood. I thought about, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why am I not back in my bedroom back at the farm? I've gone from one scary place to another scary place. But my heart was protected, because I was in charge of what was happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, along the way, some Me Too things did happen to me, yes. The book cover, for example, that Nick Egan so brilliantly came up with, of me in a towel, the turban, that emanated from a Me Too situation that's in the book. But, so it was, the Me Too movement was a huge thing for me. And I was so shy about saying anything. I don't even think I ever said #MeToo. Because I was still partially in denial for myself. I didn't want to believe these kind of things happened to me. Yeah. Because by the time I was really working in an environment like Geffen Records, I already was through all that. like I kind of must have had a force field up because nobody ever bothered me. I mean, I wasn't harassed. I wasn't, I didn't experience any Me Too Me Too issues once my career got going. It was different. It was very different for me that way. All this abuse kind of happened to me. And I think I just, like, that was it. Like from one day to the next, I was, an abused. And then I just said, I don't want to be that person anymore. And that was it. I just flipped the switch. I don't want to do drugs. I don't want to be called Pammy Sue. And I don't want to, have anybody take advantage of me.
Yeah. So you write with real bravery in this book about some pretty intense things that you just mentioned. And there are people involved in this book who are probably semi-famous. I mean, there are photographers and producers and business people and all sorts of people who are not named but might be semi-recognizable, including your ex-husband, Herth Martinez, who was discovered by Bob Dylan, I believe, and played with Robbie Robertson, who's a really accomplished musician. I wondered if you let any of those people read anything from this book, or if you told any of those people you were thinking about writing this book. How much interaction did you have with the people who you wrote about here?
Not much.
Not much. Yeah.
No. Unfortunately, well, I mean, Herth, if Herth were alive, I would have certainly wanted to talk to him about it. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago.
I'm sorry.
And I think that I was really unable to write about Herth fully because I loved him so much, and he's the father of my daughter, and I respected him so much as an artist, but not so much as a father.
Yeah.
And that's why we weren't together. But, when he passed away, I had the opportunity to help his sister, sort of close up his estate, which I somehow felt was kind of my responsibility, because I think that when you take a vow with someone and you have a child with someone, you are promising to love them, for the rest of their days.
Yeah.
And so it was really important to me that I sort of clean up his mess, so to speak. And in doing that, it was almost like spiritual for me, because I went back through all these memories that I had with him. And, if I, look back on it, it's like, it's hard because he was so special. And I remember when I first met him, I was like, I'm so damaged. I'm so effed up. I can't, he's an artist. He's so special. He deserves to be with somebody better than me. He can't possibly, I'm too damaged. I was at that point, a feral cat. I didn't want anybody I didn't want anybody to touch me. I didn't want to, bond with anybody. I just wanted to come and, like a feral cat does, get what I could on the fly, and Herth was very grounding for me. And I think I will always honor his memory because of that. He was very grounding for me. Until I found out he had a daughter. And then that was very upsetting, because then I felt well, am I just attracted to these people that, he's not taking care of his daughter? Well, what's up with that? Then I thought I could fix that. I thought I could come in and make us a family. And that's really what I wanted, was a family,
Yeah.
And I did have that with Herth to some degree for a little while. I mean, his family was wonderful to me, and kind of broke me out of that feral cat mode, which wasn't easy, because I was very, very, I think, just very damaged all the way around. And I think that that's why it really upsets me when people don't believe victims. because I have absolutely no reason to come out and tell people this story. You know, I always say I'm putting my panties in the breeze. You know, like, why am I doing this? You know, and there's no easy answer, but I think the only answer is because, and they say, why are you doing it now? You know, you're accomplished. You know, you have a wonderful husband, you have amazing children, you have amazing grandchildren. Why do you need to talk about this stuff? Like, don't keep talking, you know. And you know, to me, it was so important that I claim my authentic self before I leave this world in a way. And also because, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, you know, I felt at my most joyous, you know, my most content. And so I don't think I could speak about these things if I wasn't in that place.
Yeah.
And so because I'm in that place, I could still see that there were little dark caverns still around in there, you know, places that weren't fully healed. And by writing this book and by getting it out, and it was such a catharsis, and I didn't really care if I even published it. I just was doing it to do it. And, you know, friends of mine who've supported me, they know, like, I had a ratty little volume, and it was kind of, you know, but it was like, it was all kind of there, but it wasn't really like clicking together, but it was, you know, it was my story, and I really wanted to tell it because I really felt I had something to say. You know, I say in the book, when I was 12 years old, I found a journal that said, someday I'll write a story about me, nobody special. And I said, it's time I fulfill that 12-year-old girl's dream, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it because I really want to speak out for all these different victims that you hear their stories, and you know, unconscionable. People won't believe this, and I, you know, as a victim myself, when I see and hear a story, I hear the same words and the same feelings of everything that I went through and everything I felt. And so, you know, the more you talk about these things, just like the Me Too movement did, the more maybe, you know, some peace can come from it, you know. And I hope, I know that I grew up in a different time, but I think that these things still go on, and they need to be brought out in the open, and, like, you know, and make it. My entire childhood was stolen from me. Yeah. Is the way I feel. You know, sure, I made a lot of mistakes. I did a lot of knucklehead things, and I had a lot of, you know, fun doing it at times, and a lot of sadness. But none of it would have happened if I weren't abused. Yeah. None of it. Probably none of it. I wouldn't be Samantha Hart if I wasn't named after an affair. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, you don't, you know, and then that's a whole funny story how, you know, there's a whole reason how that whole, my name is changed to Hart, and suddenly in our office memo goes out at Geffen, you know, Samantha Martinez is now known as Samantha Hart. Everybody laughed and thought that was really funny. I just, you know, it was some crazy lady I met that had a weirder accent than mine, and we just bonded, and she became like a surrogate mom to me. And she said, I think Samantha Hart has a good ring to it. So yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, the story, but that's the short story.
Yeah. Well, I know I don't have a ton of time left, but I had one last question for you, if it's okay, before we turn it over to Q&A. I want you to tell me about the subtitle, As True a Story as I Can Tell. What a great subtitle. Why did you want it to be that?
Not as great as yours. Yours is even longer. Well, because I think I really wanted to keep the story focused on my story, my personal journey, my story. And so along the way, there are things that, you know, that in order to tell the story, I could only go so far. Otherwise, I might be telling a piece of someone else's story. So it's as true a story as I can tell about myself, you know. All the stories are true. And maybe, you know, certain places I I might have rearranged like the sequence of something, so that I could sort of switch, not show someone's character or not tell the full, like I told you, I didn't want this to be a tell-all book. It could have very easily gone into that groove. And that's just not something I was interested in doing. I was really interested in telling the story of one girl's journey, to unfathomable places and, surviving insurmountable obstacles along the way. And I think like if it can give hope to anybody out there who is struggling and I already know it has because I've gotten the emails and the LinkedIn messages, and it's been a little overwhelming to hear some of these stories, much worse than mine.
I bet.
So, I said, there's a lot of blind ponies out there.
Yeah, and it's an amazing book, Sam. Congratulations. It's fantastic. Blind Pony, buy it. And if anyone has questions, I don't know, Maggie, are you taking over for the questions or am I reading them? How does this work?
Hi, Maggie here. You can read them from the question and answer, ask a question at the bottom.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Why do you think your mom ignored the abuse?
So if anyone else has questions you'd like to answer, see the little ask a question button at the bottom there. Go ahead and throw your questions in there. Well, you kind of answered that, why you think your mom ignored the abuse before.
I think I answered that one.
Okay.
Why did people think I was British?
Yeah.
Because I think I answered that one too.
Can you give a little context though? What was the first time that somebody thought that you were British?
Well, it was Bernie Kornfeld, and he was kind of a character I met through my Pips days, and he had a lot of girls living in his mansion. He was married and his wife was pregnant, but he was a playboy, and he had just a lifestyle that was just enviable by most. And so he, they said, someone who owed me a lot of backgammon winnings I said, I can't possibly take your money. I've beat you too many times. So he says, well, I'll introduce you to Bernie Kornfeld. He knows everybody in town, like he'll get you set up, blah, blah, blah. So I go to Gray Hall Mansion and I meet Bernie, and he wants to, within 15 minutes, I'm naked, standing out in the Cinderella driveway, holding grapes over my head while he's taking pictures of me. And I mean, like, I don't even know how all that happened, but I mean, it was awkward to say the least. But he said, I was very shy and I didn't want to say a lot, and I had a very Pittsburgh accent. And I don't know if you know, that's, like I said, it's very colloquial. And I think that, I was trying to disguise my Pittsburgh accent by sounding a little more proper or something. And he mistook it for being British. And I still, to this day, don't know how this worldly man mistook my accent for being British. But he said, so what part of England are you from? And like, my mind just like went, whoa, you mean I can be from England and I don't have to be from a farm in Pennsylvania and be an abused child? Like, and I can just be this like lovable family member with all this family back home in England who can't wait to see me, at Christmas, at holidays, riding in a sleigh. I mean, just all the cliches in my mind about what England would be like just were playing out in my mind, and it certainly sounded better than being the true, my true self. So, so I became British, and I went to a dinner party that night, and there was a woman sitting across from me, and I was watching how she was cutting her food and, eating it so daintily, with the British style, and like, and I was just started mimicking that and listening to her dialect and just thought this was really cool. And so then I was British for a little while. And And then, and the funniest part is the people at the Backgammon Club who knew me and I suddenly was British, they never said like, I'd never heard your British accent before. They just kind of went along with it too. I think there was a lot of people doing a lot of drugs back then. And I just think people, it's just a different time maybe. I don't know. Then the real kicker though is when I become Australian, because someone then says, when I'm doing the styling job for someone says, well, you have the French aesthetic down for being an Australian. And just like that, I got a job at and just like that, I was Australian, And so I was just rolling along, I was 17. Like, what do I do? So.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next question. So Nick Egan says, it took a lot of courage to commit to writing the book, not least because of the violence and abuse you suffered from a former partner, something that angered me so much. Now you've found love with James, your husband. How difficult was that decision?
That decision?
I think to write the book, now that you're in a happy relationship.
Well, it was something I had to do. And I think that James is a unique partner because he really married all of me. I think he's the first person that really knew who I was, for good, for bad, everything, about me, and accepted it and like acknowledged and honored it, and in a way that was unique to any other relationship that I've been in. I felt, safe with James.
Yeah.
And in fact, he really pushed me to write this book. I remember, reading him some journal writing, and he said, "Oh, you have to write a book. You just have to." And I said, "Well, I'm not a writer. I don't really." And he said, "Oh, you can do it. You can do it." And he just kept pushing me and pushing me. And so, it was actually, it was hard. I mean, I tell a story. I think I told you this, Melissa. Like one time, my sons and my husband James came home and they didn't see my car here and they couldn't find me, and they were looking around, and the way they found me was I was snoring in the closet, and because I had curled up in a little ball because I was writing in the book. And it was such a catharsis for me, and to put myself back in the mind of that little girl and all the things that I went through, and then that young woman, and I was always looking for a secret hideout. I was always looking for somewhere to hide. And I remember I say it in the book, my grandmother saying, come out from under the stairwell. That's where the kitten lays her litter of that's where the cat goes to lay her litter of kittens. That's not for little girls. But for me, I never felt safe. I just felt so vulnerable. Like anytime my grandfather came around, there was the whistling sound that he made. There was like, you could just tell when he was coming for you. And there really wasn't much you could do, and people say like, well, why didn't you run away? Or why didn't you? I thought, I finally did. Right. But I mean, it was our family's livelihood. This was the roof over our heads. And, I think I just felt it was my responsibility to be available for that. So.
Next question is, what was the part of the book that was the easiest to write and why?
Oh, I think the scene, it's just I think the most fun scene. None of it was easy,
Yeah.
to be honest, but I really had fun with the scene about I think because there was, the Jeopardy wasn't there or something. I don't know what chapter it is, but when I meet Huntington, his character, and he's the one. I don't know if I want to give it away because people are going to read the book, but I think that chapter I had so much fun with because I'm really at a sort of crossroads in my life, and I think that like going back to that period of time and remembering how, carefree I was, and how crazy I was and how, daring I was and just invincible I felt. I just had so much fun. I mean, like, that scene, that set piece, that whole thing, reliving that was, I think, the most fun for me of all of it.
It's a good scene. Yeah.
Yeah. It just was, it ends very sadly, but, it was an epiphany. And that was a big moment for me. That was when, I really understood who my father was and, why I needed to, that I needed to be on I need to find my way. It depressed me at the same time, but it healed me in other ways.
Yeah. Well, I won't give away that scene, but it's an excellent scene. Do we have time, Maggie, for one more question?
One more quick question.
Okay. Since both the last questions are the same, I will ask the last question, which is, will you write more books and continue the story where Blind Pony ends?
Well, I have 2 books in the works. One is a novel, and a lot of it is loosely based on my story, but it's not going to be technically a memoir. I want the ending. I have an ending that's not real life, so it's definitely going to be a lot of fun. I'm writing that now, and then I'm doing a coffee table book that is going to be drawings through the male gaze and words and stories through the female gaze. So that's called The Artist Muse.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sam, for talking to me. And
thank you.
Your book, Maggie, tell them how they can do it.
That's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you again to all of our guests and to those of you who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase tonight's copy of our featured book. Please click on the green purchase button that reads Blind Pony directly below the viewer screen. Remember to like copies of Blind Pony.
Remember, I'm a marketer.
The copies will be signed by Samantha Hart, so get them while they last.
It's really good.
If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, please make sure to follow our podcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.